Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Divine and in today's tutorial I'll be showing us how to create a hip and butt pad and also how to attach this hip and butt pad to our skirt. So if this is something you're interested in, let's get started with the tutorial for today. So these are the materials I'll be using: my stay, my lining, my Ankara fabric and my skirt pattern, and also my foam. So in a previous video, I showed us how to go about the drafting of a pencil skirt. I'll be leaving the link to that video in my description. But just to explain what I have here, I have a waist of 28 inches divided by 4, that's 7 inches. I have a hip of 38 inches divided by 4, that's 9.5 inches. And I minus 6 from the 38 inches to get my knee length of 32 inches. So that is it for the front pattern here, and for the back pattern also I have a hip line of 8 inches and a knee line of 20 inches. I have a waist of 7 inches plus 1 inch for that's 8 inches. I have my hip of 9.5 inches and I have my knee of 8 inches. So please watch that pattern drafting video for better understanding on how I got this pattern. So I want to get the full length of the skirt I'll be working with today. So I'm coming down with 1 inch from the 20 inches knee length. I came down with 1 inch. So this is the full length of my skirt for today. So for this back dart, I want to eliminate it. I don't want to sew any dart at the back of my skirt. So I'll just quickly take this out, and I'll be coming in with 1 inch from the side of my pattern and connect it back to the hip. This is optional, you can decide to sew the dart at the back of your skirt. So I'll just take this out, and this is what I have. Now I'm going to be adding a piece of paper to the side of the front and the back pattern like so we can increase the hip measurement for this skirt. So I'm going to be using a 1 inch foam for today's tutorial. So this 1 inch foam here is not actually up to 1 inch, but they call it 1 inch foam. I'm having 0.75 inches here, and by the time we iron the foam, we'll be left with about 0.5 inches. So what I'm going to do now, extend the hip line on this front pattern here, and I'm going to be increasing this with ½ inch. So I said the foam I'm working with is you call it a 1 inch foam, but it's not up to 1 inch, it is like about 0.75 inches. So by the time we are done trimming and we are done sewing, we'll be left with about ½ inch. So when we are increasing our pattern, we are going to be adding just ½ inch to our skirt pattern. So I've added ½ inch to the hip line. I'll connect it back to my waist and connect it back to my hip. Then I'll cut out. So with this ½ inch now, it means we've added 2 inches extra to our hip measurement. I'll do the same for the back. I'll increase the hip line. I'm going to come out with ½ inch. Then connect that ½ inch to my waistline and my knee line. So the initial hip we were working with was hip 38. With this now, we are going to be having a total hip of 40. So if you don't want your hip to be up to 2 inches extra, you can go for a lesser foam. They call that the ½ inch foam. So you can decide to use the ½ inch foam, but I'm working with the 1 inch foam today. So I'm going to cut out, and if you want more padding, you can also go for about 1.5 inches from thereabout. So now to mark out the padding for the front, I'm going to be coming down with 2 inches from the waistline, after which I'll measure what I have from my waist to my hip line, which is 8 inches. I'll mark that same 8 inches from my hip line downwards. So what I have from my waist to my hip line is 8. I'll mark the same from my hip line downwards, 8 inches. Then from the center front of my pattern, I'm going to mark my nipple to nipple measurement divided by 2, which is 3.5 inches. I'll mark that 3.5 inches. I'll mark it at different points, then connect the points together. This is so I can get a straight line. And this straight line is just serving as a guide, so the foam does not come forward too much. So now I'm going to be blending these 2 inches points. I'll be blending it to touch the nipple to nipple line, and I'll blend it downwards also. You can see how the shape is. So this is what I'm having for the front. Then I'll label it the up, the down, the front. so we don't mix it up. For the back also, I'm going to come down with 2 inches from the waistline. Then measure what I have from my waistline to my hip line, which is 8 inches. I'll mark the same from my hip line downwards, 8 inches. Then I'll come to the center back, which is my zipper side. I'm going to go inwards with 1.5 inches. Then I'll connect the 3 points together. So I don't want the foam to enter into my zipper allowance or get too close to my zipper. So I'll be going in with 1.5. Then I'll be connecting it downwards. But before then, I'm going to just draw a straight line on this 8 inches point. Then go up with about 2.5 inches. Then I'm going to blend like so. When I get to that 2.5 inches, I'm going to be reducing the curve on that point. So this is the kind of curve I want to have. And you can also make your curve to be this way. You can also make your butt at the back to be this way, but I prefer this one. So I'm going to label the up, the down, the back. Now I'm going to be tracing out this curve because we can't cut our main pattern. We've not cut out our skirt yet. So I'll place another sheet of paper underneath my pattern, then use my tracing wheel to trace out the shape of this padding. Then I'm going to label it how it is on the main pattern. And I'll follow the dotted lines now to draw out the curve of the hip padding for the front. And on this side here, I'm going to be adding 1/2 inch allowance to this side here. So we're going to be sewing this padding, not using a gum. I prefer to sew like a bustier kind of way. I'm going to be cutting out. So this is what I'm having for the front. Now for the back also, I'll place another sheet of paper underneath and trace out this pattern. And please note that we are tracing with the new hip line. We're no longer working with the old hip line. That is why we had to add another piece of paper. So we're working with a hip of 40 now, not 38. I'll trace out the curve. And this is what we are having for the back. Now on the side also, I'm going to add 1/2 inch allowance. Like I said, we're going to be sewing this like a bustier, not gumming it. So this is what I'm having for the front and back. I'm going to go ahead and cut this on my foam now, and I'll cut 2 pieces each, 2 for the left, 2 for the right. And I'm going to label this also using my marker, so we don't end up putting the up, sewing the up with the down for the down. So this is what I'm having. Then on the center back and on the center front, we're going to be trimming the center back and the center front. So I'm just going to make a mark so we can identify the center back. So this is our center back, the side facing the zipper. And this is our center front, the side facing the nipple to nipple line. So I'm just going to draw a mark. This is where we are going to be trimming. So I'm having 2 front and back for the left hip and for the right hip. So I'm going to show us how to go about the trimming of this. So you can see what I'm doing. I'm trying to reduce the volume of the foam at that point. If we don't trim this properly, our foam is going to be bulging out from our skirt, and it's going to be very obvious that it is not our hip here. And we padded it. So we need to trim this to be smooth. We need to reduce the width of that point to be very thin. Then we're going to make sure we blend it properly so that it blends with our shape when we wear it. If it's high, it's going to be like there's plaster on your hip or something. So you can see how smooth this is here compared to what I'm having on the other side. You can also see how thin it has become on that part. So I'm going to keep on doing this, and I'll show us what I have when I'm done with it. So your trimming needs to be smooth. It needs to blend. So after I'm done, you can see what I'm having, how smooth it is compared to what we are having here. You can see how fat the other one is and how thin this one is. So by the time we put this on our skirt, it's going to blend properly. I'm going to do this for the other pieces, and this is what I'm having. You can see how thin the starting points are. But note that we're only trimming the sides. We're not trimming we're only trimming the center back and center front, not the side. So I'll iron my hairstay on the front and back of the foam, then cut out my skirt pattern with the lining. So this is my skirt. I've added my seam allowance around this pattern. I added a seam allowance of 1.5 inches on the down, and I've cut out my lining. Now on this lining, I'm going to be cutting out 2 inches. I added 1.5 to the Ankara on the lower part, but I'll be cutting out 2 inches from the lining. I don't want the lining to be equal with this Ankara fabric when sewing. I'll do the same for the back pieces. I've added my seam allowance. I'll cut out 2 inches from the lining. I added 1 inch seam allowance to the side and 1.25 for the zipper allowance, and 1/2 inch on the waistline. This is a bandless skirt, by the way. So to join our skirt, I'm going to open up the Ankara fabric and arrange our pieces together, making sure the right sides face each other. Then I'll sew with 1 inch, which is the seam allowance I added. I'll sew with 1 inch, and I won't be sewing the center back, just the side. I'll do the same for my lining. I'm going to arrange it. Then I'm going to mark out my seam allowance of 1 inch on the waistline, and I'm going to mark out my hip line of 8.5 inches. Then I'm going to be marking 1/2 inch here instead of 1 inch. I want the lining to be bigger than the main fabric. I'll explain later on. So, and on the hem here, I'm going to mark the 1 inch I added for seam allowance. So instead of marking out 1 inch on the hip, I'm marking out 1/2 inch. I want the lining to be loose on this skirt here. So I'll do the same for the back. On the hip line, I'll mark 1/2 inch instead of the 1 inch seam allowance I added. Then I'm going to pin it. Please always pin your pieces together before sewing. I'll pin it, then shape it. I'll connect the 1 inch on the waist to touch the 1/2 inch on the hip, and thereafter. So I've ironed my hairstay on both sides of my foam. And you can see the smooth side, the side that we trimmed. I labeled it. This is the side we trimmed. So the side that we trimmed is going to be facing each other like so. We close it up like so and sew with 1/2 inch. The side we trimmed will be facing each other and sew with 1/2 inch. I've sewn my skirt here. I've also sewn my lining. Now we are going to be attaching the foam to the lining. And you can see how high the foam is. You can see how high it is, and very fine. This is our hip padding. Now to attach the hip padding to our skirt, I'm going to open up the wrong side of my lining and come down with 2.5 inches, 1/2 inch for the seam allowance we added to the waist, and 2 inches that we came down with on the pattern. That's 2.5 inches. Now I'll make sure this allowance of our padding touches the allowance of the lining. Then the front should be facing the front and the back should be facing the back, and this side that we trimmed around should be facing up. So please, let's pay attention to this, if not we will lose. So you can see here, when we put on our skirt, the hip is facing the lining and this curved side is facing outwards. That will be pushing out on our Ankara fabric. So we need to get the arrangement right. So I'm going to open up the seam allowance there, then place the tip of the hip padding on the 2.5 inches mark. Then I'm going to pin it. At this point we need our pins. I'll fold the hip padding in, then turn it over so I can pin the down part. Now we need to pull the lining to make sure the lining does not gather at that point. So even when we pull it like so, you can see that there's a little bit of allowance on the hip side. That is why, like you can see, that is why I said we should make the hip a little bit bigger than our measurement. So now I'm going to keep on arranging my lining properly and pin it. I'll make sure my lining does not gather. I'll smooth the lining out, then pin it all around. I'll do that for the back. I'll pin it. And after pinning, I'll take it to my machine now, and it will be easier for me to sew round because I've pinned it in place. So I'll sew at the edge of this foam. I'll sew on the tip of the foam all round. I'm going to do the same for this side. I'm going to come down with 2.5 inches. Make sure the sewing allowance of the foam faces the sewing allowance of the lining, and the side we trimmed faces up. I'll pin it, open up my seam allowance on my lining, I'll pin it, then pin it down. I'll pull the lining to make sure it does not gather, then pin the back round, then pin the front also round. So after I'm done pinning, I'm going to take it to my machine and sew it all around. So this will be easier for us to sew once we've pinned everything in place. I'll sew at the edge of the foam, and this is what I'm having after doing that. And you can see our foam did not get to our sewing allowance. So with this now, I'm going to get the midpoint of the waistline. I'll fold the front together to get the midpoint. I'll do the same for the hem. I'll fold the front together and get the midpoint. I'll do the same for my Ankara fabric. I'll fold the front together, get the midpoint, I'll notch it. Fold the front of the hem together and get the midpoint. So we want to turn our lining with our main fabric. Now on the hem, I'm going to make sure the right side of the lining faces the right side of the Ankara fabric. Then I'm going to pin the two notched points together. I'll pin the two midpoints together, then sew with 1/2 inch all the way. And because we cut out 2 inches from our lining, you can see it's not equal here. So we're going to pull the lining up and make sure it's equal. Then I'm going to sew with 1/2 inch also. This is the bandless skirt, by the way. After that, I'm going to be sewing one side of the center back with 0.25 inches so that we can turn out our skirt from the other center back. So I'll be sewing the down, I'll be sewing the waist, and I'll be sewing one of the center back so we can turn our skirt from the other side. But if you're attaching band to your skirt, it means you'll be sewing the two center backs and the lower part so that you can turn out your skirt from the waist. But we're doing a bandless skirt now, so we are turning from one side of the center back. I'll turn it out, and after doing that, I'm going to sew the open side close. This is what we are having. You can see what we're having here. So this side that is open now, I'm going to fold it in with 0.25 and sew it. I'll sew the tip, fold it in with 0.25 and sew the tip all the way to the end. Then on the waistline, I'm going to arrange the Ankara fabric and the lining properly and sew 1/2 inch on it. This is the bandless skirt. So I've done that here now, and this is what we're having. What I'll do next is to close up the center back. I'm going to pin it all the way, then mark our hip line of 8 inches. I'll come down, mark our hip line of 8 inches. So the seam allowance here is 1 inch. We added 1.25, but we've used 0.25 to close it up, so we're left with 1 inch for the seam allowance. And on the lower part, I'm going to go up with 5 inches for the slit opening. So I'm going to start sewing with loose stitches to the hip line, I'll top stitch, sew with normal stitches to the slit line, I'll top stitch, then sew with loose stitches all the way to the end. After which, I'm going to fix my zip and open up the slit allowance. And this is what I'm having, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in my next video. Bye for now.